Thank you so much, everybody. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Kamler. You are in for a treat. You know, in 2003, our next guest was outed as a CIA agent as retribution for the criticisms her husband had rightfully levied against the Bush administration and their reasons for going to war in Iraq. In 2010, a movie starring Naomi Watts and Sean Penn told their story. It was directed by Doug Liman, and now, in a time that may need that movie more than ever, it is being re-released in a new director's cut. Let's take a look at Fair Game.
Those in the highest office sought to destroy the career of a public servant to punish me for telling the truth.
So, Valerie, what do?
I want you to head up operations for a joint task force on Iraq. This is top priority.
Your uncle's in business with a terror organization. They're seeking materials to build a weapon.
The Office of the Vice President has received a report from the governments of Niger and Iraq for the purchase of 500 tons of yellow cake uranium ore. Can you help us?
They're all saying the same thing.
We went to war, and what do we found? No bio, no WMDs?
So why hasn't anybody stepped forward?
Why you think, Joe?
It is my opinion this sale could not have happened.
We need to change the story. Does the president have the power to declassify information?
Valerie, your name is in the paper.
Says you're a CIA agent.
Wilson never worked for the CIA, but his wife...
As an agency operative on weapons of mass destruction.
I have a critical operation in Baghdad.
And what do you think the White House wants to hear? There was no nuclear program? P.S. You all knew that?
My name is everywhere. My real name, Joe.
You've got to speak up, Valerie. You've got to defend us now.
Do you seriously think you can pick a fight with the White House and win?
This is our chance. We've got to strike back.
They'll bury us if we don't.
What they did was wrong, Val. Don't you ever forget that.
Have you been lying to us from the start?
They can't break me. This is who I am. I don't have a breaking point.
Everybody, please welcome Doug Liman and Valerie Plame. Let's hear it.
Thank you.
Hey.
Thank you.
I want to start off by apologizing for not having seen this movie when it came out in 2010.
I'd rather you see it now.
I agree.
It's more relevant now.
It's incredibly relevant right now, and you know, there's a host of movies coming out about right now and telling stories maybe from the past that relate to right now. And to be honest, I think this is actually the most prescient. This is the best told, and this is the smartest about where we are right now in regards to this administration, in regards to the truth and how they use, diffuse, misinform when it comes to the truth. So what brought you back to this movie, Doug?
I mean, I'd love to, especially sitting here with Valerie Plame, come at it, say that it was lofty political reasons that drove me to want to recut it. But it actually it came from an artistic place. I felt like the movie that I had released in 2010, even though it received a standing ovation at Cannes, which,
doesn't happen.
Doesn't happen all the time. They tell you, you're going to stand there and they're either going to boo you, do nothing, or standing ovation. So it's sort of terrifying, and I got a standing ovation. But even after all of that, I felt, it's not the best version of the movie. Really? And I wanted to go back for artistic reasons, like a kind of an artist who maybe has finished a painting and has sold it, and it's hanging in someone's house, knocking on the door with a can of paint and going, I just want to, I know you already bought it, but I want to touch it up a little bit. And I thought, can you do that? Can a director just go back and be like, I know the film's already been released, but, I want to go back in and recut it. And I thought, why not? I've sort of made a career of kind of asking that question, why not? And, sort of act first and ask for permission or forgiveness later. So I didn't even tell anyone I was doing this. I brought an Academy Award-winning editor in, and also I think because we were making the film, the events were so recent. I mean, Scooter Libby, who's a character in the movie, we were at his trial every day. So
while they were writing
Jazz Butterworth, is a hit play right now on just opened this week on Broadway, The Ferryman, was at Scooter Libby's trial every day. And so the events were so recent when we were making the film that I needed the break from it. I needed to sort of take a break from all the politics, because what I really was interested in is the story of a husband and wife who decide to take on the most powerful men in the world and the impact it has on them as individuals and the impact it has on their marriage.
I think that's true. I think there is a sense of when it came out, there was people who said, I just live this. I can't deal with this. And now we have the privilege of being able, maybe it's not a privilege, but being able to view this film within a historical context and see what it means and see what the ramifications over the years have been. So what is it like for you to revisit this film and to revisit this story, especially in light of where we are right now?
Sure. Well, I thought the original was outstanding. It told the essential truth of what happened. I'm very grateful to Doug because Joe and I were able to be on the set and be very engaged and involved. I mean, it's scary. They're making a movie about you, and you have no control. So who knows? But this summer, when Doug came to me and said, I've tweaked it, I've fiddled with it a little bit, it is so much better. And as Doug was saying, time and distance allows you to process it, certainly on a personal level, because for years there, we were living in just sort of a whirlwind of madness. So that has been allowed to percolate a little bit, but also on the national level. As a country, we have yet to have a reckoning of the Iraq War and the consequences that we're going to be living with for generations, I think. And what Doug's recent cut does is bring out these themes of speaking truth to power, the consequences, what's that like on a personal level, on a national level. And they're unfortunately, much more relevant now than ever before.
A reckoning I would assume a reckoning would look like the country as a whole kind of comes together in an understanding as to the mistakes that were made and what had happening. Whereas there may be a kind of reckoning happening in the sense that this administration has coarsened and viewed the things that have happened. The lessons that they have learned is to go harder and to dig deeper on lies, on misinformation. I think of the final scene of the film, which is Sean Penn saying something along the lines of, I tried to talk about the war and they made it about my wife.
Right.
Which we see so often happen on any news story with this administration.
Pivoting, and it's even more intense now. When these events first started in 2003, social media and all the various platforms and even just the news cycle was a little bit slower than where we are 15 years on. I would hate to have to go through something like Dr. Blasey Ford did, recent events, with the madness that social media has brought to all of our lives. And it just makes it that much more intense.
Do you think the madness of, I don't mean to pivot away from the film so quickly, excuse me. Do you think the madness of social media in our lives and the way in which this administration handles media and handles the news, and maybe the way that the media responds it, has made CIA analysts' jobs harder and possibly made authoritarian power across the world stronger?
Well, there's definitely the rise in populism that we see not only in this country, but around the world. I think it's important to wake up every day and make sure you say, this is not normal. We are being desensitized because there's so much being thrown at us. And so this film...
Multiple bombs went to
yeah, exactly.
Not candidates, but former politicians. The Clintons, the Obamas, Debbie Wasserman Schultz's office, and CNN's office today.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah,
I
today.
didn't. I heard the Clintons, not the. There's so much news being pushed at us, and with this administration, it's hard to keep up with whatever the outrageous thing was yesterday because you're on to the next thing. But Doug's film allows, again, a little bit of time, and you go, where are we? How did we get here? And you see the same things happening today that you did back in 2003, where Joe Wilson was taking on the most powerful men in the world.
And, this may be, in fact, a role that filmmakers, are meant to play in a democracy. That, news organizations, especially today, there's so much news happening, one thing after another after another. I mean, that it's, and if there isn't actually breaking news, Trump's going to do a tweet and create breaking news.
Yeah.
So it might be the role of filmmakers who have the resources and have amazing writers who can sort of process it and put it into a form that's entertaining and educational, it may be the role of filmmakers to look back and tell a story like Fair Game.
To contextualize what had happened rather than just sort of chase the new shiny ball.
Because imagine you have a young audience here. Probably no one's seen Fair Game. I mean, for some of you, you're barely born when the war was happening.
They were in second grade.
But I'm wondering how many of you actually know how we ended up in this war in Iraq and where hundreds of thousands of people died. I mean, it's more Americans died there than in 9/11.
And how the American public was really sold a bill of goods, because this is exactly what my husband, Joe Wilson, wrote an op-ed piece for the New York Times. He went after the central premise that the Bush administration gave for going to war in Iraq, which is Iraq is an imminent nuclear threat. And we bought it as a public. We went to war. And thousands of American servicemen and women were killed, not to mention the hundreds of thousands of Iraqis as a consequence of that. And we are still paying, and we will be paying, the price of that decision for years to come. And ironically, John Bolton, one of the architects of the Iraq War, is back in this administration in a big way, and very much a part of some, I think, mistaken strategic decisions.
But I'm interested in movies about sort of people being put in extraordinary situations. But what happens to the person? I made a film called The Bourne Identity. I wasn't interested in the guns and the spycraft as much as I was interested in, a character who has amnesia being chased across Europe by people trying to kill him. And I made a film called Edge of Tomorrow, and I was interested in not so much the aliens, but the experiences of Tom Cruise's character and how humans deal with extraordinary events. And in the case of Fair Game, you have Valerie's husband, Joe Wilson, who knows, because he was the one who went to Africa, he knows firsthand that the president lied to the American people in the State of the Union address, and in his rationale for going to war, cited information that Joe Wilson knew was incorrect, was a lie. Mm-hmm. And what do you do when you have that information, when you know the president is lying? And maybe today that feels quaint. I mean, there's my favorite scene in the film, Sean Penn is outraged that the president could lie to the American people. And maybe that just seems quaint today.
Yeah, so old school.
But right? I really was interested in from a character point of view, when you have a White House that's so powerful, and that has been ruthless in crushing its enemies, and you have a political dynasty, the Bush dynasty, who challenging the war could undo that dynasty and undo a legacy. It's not just one president; it's two presidents, because his father was president, and an aspiring third president, Jeb Bush. Mm-hmm. What do you do? Do you stand up to those people?
Mm-hmm. Trump, this current administration has been quite vocal about the previous things that I think administrations would say are the quiet part, often when it comes to geopolitical practices. And I think about the brutal murder of Jamal Khashoggi in Saudi Arabia, and the way in which Trump has very outwardly said, look, we supply them with arms. I'm not really willing to punish them and lose out on this
completely
arms
transactional
deal. Right, a transactional quid pro quo relationship.
Forget the human rights element. Yeah.
How does sort of forgetting the human rights element, at least even just on the surface, affect our standing across the globe, in your opinion?
Look, the day after 9/11, happened not too far from here, of course, the entire world was with us. There was, I believe, a window of opportunity where we really could have provided true leadership. And it was squandered over the next few years, and it continues. Our moral authority has completely eroded. We're at the point now where our friends and allies have no idea how much credibility to put into whatever Trump is saying.
And how does that affect your former colleagues at the CIA?
I got to imagine that the morale, it really suffers as a result. I mean, it's look, when you serve, whether you're in the military or intelligence or foreign service office or overseas, you are serving as an American. You're not serving as a Democrat or as a Republican. And presidents of each party come and go, and you do your best. Sometimes you don't like it. But this particular administration, I think it's fair to say, is so far out of the norms that it is extremely difficult. You saw that, the op-ed in the New York Times written by Anonymous a few weeks ago. And I think a lot of my former colleagues feel deeply uncomfortable. I can only imagine that intelligence relationships that were built up over decades, where you have a mutually compatible target, terrorism, nuclear weapons, whatever, where that has really been called into question because this particular administration is so volatile and impulsive, and certainly it seems a lot of the top officials spend a lot of their time cleaning up or explaining whatever the president just said.
Do you think that's one of the reasons that we're seeing a certain amount of the rise of authoritarian leaders across the country now, because they see an opening? They see that liberal democracy in some way is failing on the world stage?
Yeah, they're certainly trying, aren't they? We're seeing that in quite a few countries, Western Europe and beyond. And Trump glorifies this, the strong man. You know, he's cozied up to everyone from Putin to Duarte to the others that are trying to push this. And I think democracy is under a real threat. Certainly, we don't have a healthy democracy in this country. I just saw something today that, of course, the voting rate across the United States is about 60%. So all the great, you know, get out and vote videos you see from celebrities and the voter sign-ups and so forth, that's all great, but we're still so far. I saw Congressman John Lewis tweeted out something, because isn't that how you talk to everyone, that, you know, look, I suffered a fractured head and broken bones for my right to vote. The least you can do is go exercise your franchise.
You know, one of the storylines of this film, of course, is Scooter Libby. And President Trump pardoned Scooter Libby. What did it feel like for you when he pardoned him, and what do you think he was trying to say to those who worked for him and currently work for him?
The pardon had nothing to do with Scooter Libby. I'm pretty sure Trump only had the vaguest idea.
Who he was?
Yeah, exactly. Certainly had nothing to do with me. In my viewing, it had everything to do with Trump sending a message to a very small group of people that you have my back, I will have yours. And of course, Scooter Libby was convicted of lying to the FBI and obstruction of justice by a jury of his peers. He was indicted and convicted on those 2 counts. And so those 2 charges are things we're hearing a lot, of course, in connection with the Mueller case.
You know, I have a question for you. Just, you know, the thing about Valerie Plame is, like, she's not supposed to be here on stage with these lights on her. I mean, Valerie served for a number of years. You know, it's still classified, although we have a pretty good idea when she started working for the CIA.
Not for me.
She can't say she started working there before 2002, but in 2002 she was head of the Iraq task force, and presumably that's not your first job at the CIA. And we know when her FBI security forms were done, so we have an idea of about 20 years that she worked at the CIA. And so as a filmmaker, being able to sort of meet a real-life spy, because I've you know, done the Bourne franchise, TV show called Covert Affairs. I'm very interested in espionage.
Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
Mr. and Mrs. Smith. So having a chance to sort of be around a real-life spy, and Valerie's colleagues came and spoke with us because they're so outraged on her behalf, and they're people I normally wouldn't get to meet. So George Tenet, who's a big fan of the Bourne Identity, told me that Bourne helped CIA recruitment. But from what I heard from Valerie's colleagues was that when they saw movies like The Bourne Identity, they were like, it didn't match at all their job. And they thought maybe somewhere in the CIA, there's the back room where the really cool stuff happens, and someone has to come and tap you on the shoulder, and then you get to go in that back room. And I look at this Saudi operation that seems almost like out of a movie. And I'm wondering, so...
Coen Brothers movie, though. Like they're knuckleheads about this so far. They don't really know what they're doing.
But that's such a grisly detail.
So, did someone ever tap you on the shoulder? Did that operation in any way look familiar?
What I will say is this. Seriously, I love my job. I was proud to have served my country. There were moments of... there was stretches of boredom and periods of intense adrenaline rush. I was never involved in anything to do with a bone saw, okay? But certainly the Saudis under Mohammed bin Saud, very ruthless. And I think this was a power play, and he was sending a very clear signal to other ones who might challenge his relatively new regime. I saw, I think it was yesterday, the head of the CIA, Gina Haspel, flew to Turkey to try to understand.
Notice how Valerie's not giving us any information about what she may have participated in.
I'm going to go around.
She was in the CIA. She knows how to do this.
Yeah.
You know, we talked about, we mentioned Scooter Libby and his pardon. What exactly do you think all of the people who've been convicted or potentially stand to be convicted are thinking after something like that?
Oh, don't you think they're thinking, whew, thank goodness. Oh, okay. You know, I can take the fall and.
I don't think Trump's known for his subtlety. He's someone saying, this guy was convicted of perjury and lying to the FBI and obstruction of justice. Trump's like, okay, fine, that sounds good.
Don't worry, you'll get your law license
back. Those are the charges
back.
the people that are working for me are facing. You know.
Do you think he acted alone?
Who, Scooter Libby?
Yeah.
Oh, no, we know he didn't. There were at least half a dozen journalists that the senior White House officials pushed my name to. We know that. The one who printed it, he's dead now.
But he was convicted
Robert
of obstruction of justice, of
Yeah.
blocking the
whole
FBI from
investigation.
finding out who exactly in the White House did participate in this besides him.
Now, you know, and as I said before in this interview, at the end of the film, we have Sean Penn saying, as your husband, I wanted to make it about the war. They wanted to make it about my wife. How often do you see that right now in this administration? I mean, you brought up Blasey Ford, and I think that's a great example of them taking, it's supposed to be about this accusation, this assault, but we're going to make it about where she went to school or another boyfriend that she had.
No, it was painful to watch that, I think, for the vast majority of Americans, no matter where it came down on that. Just a painful spectacle all the way around. But you have the most powerful individuals in the world, in the White House, with all the levers of power. And if they train them on you, as Sean Penn says in the movie, quoting a Bush administration official, they were moving earth movers over Joe Wilson.
And now, you know, it's a terrible time to criticize our media, but what does it say about the failure on their part to not chase the shiny object, to stay on point, to follow the really important story there?
Yeah, I don't, you're absolutely right. I really hesitate to, I don't want to criticize the media. This is why nonpartisan, deep investigative reporting is more important than ever. And know your sources. Try to bring in as much different things that go against what your typical worldview.
And before Joe Wilson wrote his op-ed piece, you know, the media was circling the war and saying, wait a second, there's no WMDs. Were we being sold a bill of goods? Was the president lying to us when he told us Saddam Hussein was trying to build a nuclear bomb, because there doesn't seem to be a nuclear bomb? So the media really, investigative journalists, were really starting to unpack this story. Mm-hmm. They were hitting a lot of roadblocks, and then Joe Wilson came in and said, I'm the one who went to Africa, and I can tell you, the title of his piece is, What I Didn't Find in Africa. He did not find an arms sale that Bush had referenced. And that, you know, and the White House had to immediately retract Bush's State of the Union address that was used to justify the war. I mean, it was unimpeachable what Joe Wilson said. So he is the reason we actually know that for a fact that the Bush administration lied and manipulated the intelligence for us to go to war. But prior to that, the media, investigative journalists were starting to unpack this, and
yes,
you know, I have every reason to believe they would have eventually gotten there and put it together. So I do think journalists have a role to play, and they are doing it. It's just, it's easier when one of the participants comes forward. But, you know, I hope the moral of the story, when people see fair game, people who are in the administration and who are witnessing wrongdoing, isn't, oh my God, look what happened to Joe Wilson and Valerie Plame. And
it should be speaking out, the importance of holding your government to account for their words, their deeds, speaking truth to power.
I was just screaming at the screen, this is still happening, this is still happening. The lesson that they've learned is to dig deeper and go harder at this.
Watching the film last night, we watched with an audience. It was my first time watching it with Valerie, the new director's cut, and it's surreal because you can't believe, it'd be like watching The Bourne Identity and the real Jason Bourne is next to you. You can't believe that somebody actually lived this and went through this, and they're right there. And the thing that is the biggest gut punch for me, because it's a scripted movie with a brilliant playwright, Jez Butterworth, who really took a massive story and made it unbelievably compelling and character driven. But all of the news footage that's in the movie is real. Yeah. Every piece of news clip. And you sit there's a scene where Naomi Watts as Valerie Plame is watching somebody on TV.
Fox News.
On Fox, talking about how she really was just a glorified secretary.
Really,
and they're suddenly diminishing a 20-year career as a nuclear counterproliferation expert, somebody who rose to the rank of, because Valerie's talked about it, the CIA is still sort of a boys' club, and I'm like, well, it wasn't for you because you became head of the Iraq task force. But to think about somebody who's spent 20 years in service of this country, and then somebody can just get on TV and diminish it all and say she was just a glorified secretary, and imagining what that must be like as a human being to go through that, and knowing that that news clip is a real news clip, and that Valerie Plame is a real person.
That's what I mean. It feels like we've coarsened, and these things happen at an even greater rate at this point when it comes to people who come forward and try to speak truth to power.
But we can never forget the human beings that are. We just can't, and I think maybe that's a role that filmmakers have to play, because we're interested in the human beings. We're interested in characters.
Yeah, absolutely. We continue to humanize, whereas I think conservative outlets, news outlets oftentimes, I'll just say conservative outlets, do their best to dehumanize people who try to speak truth to power. Doug brought up that your main course of action in the CIA was nuclear counterproliferation, just in the last couple days, we have seen some wild news come out in regards to counterproliferation.
Indeed. Yeah, and not in a good way. Yeah. Of course, we've pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal some months ago, which is a shame. I think it was the best deal we had going, that even the experts didn't think we would get such a good deal. It did contain Iran's nuclear program. But in the last few days, we have pulled out of the INF, which is Intermediate Range Nuclear Force Treaty with Russia. It was actually signed under President Reagan, who, as you know, Reagan and Gorbachev really finally did see eye to eye in trying to envision a world without nuclear weapons. So we've pulled out of that. They said the Russians have violated it, which is true, but that's not a reason to walk away. That's how you re-engage. But of course,
aren't the Russians also kind of baffled that we're walking away from it too, or is this something that is?
I think it came as a bit of a surprise. Yeah. And the other thing I just saw yesterday, Trump said, well, until the other nations come to their senses, we're going to build up our nuclear arsenal. We already have committed to over $1 trillion build up. They call it modernization, and of course, it's going to be more than $1 trillion. We're moving in the wrong direction. We absolutely are. And all of this is happening when we're essentially what seems to be a new Cold War between the United States and Russia, which is complicated further by the bromance between Putin and Trump. But this is something I care about passionately. When I left the CIA in 2007, I've been deeply involved in these issues and trying to advocate for a world without nuclear weapons in different ways.
And why is that?
Because no matter what you care about, filmmaking, or women's reproductive rights, or gun control, or polar bears, whatever it is, none of them matter if you do not get the nuclear question right. And we are moving in the wrong direction right now.
Why?
Because right now, well, first of all, we have a very impulsive president who I'm armchair psychologist. He sees nuclear weapons as part of his masculinity and his power. it makes it. I won't even go there.
You're right. That's just crazy that we can't even think in terms of party policy of any kind. It's just like, no, he is an emasculated, insecure adult baby who thinks that these things mean he gets to be the big macho tough guy.
That's right. And his statements, almost all his statements.
We also should remember that war is a sexy thing for a president to do. I mean, in so many ways, the White House is limited and hedged in, and Congress, if you visit Washington, D.C., the Capitol is actually in the center of D.C., right? The White House just has a street address. But when you go to war, the president's the commander-in-chief, and you get to stand on an aircraft carrier and a bomber jacket, and we just know as human beings that's appealing.
Yeah.
And I think that it's, and especially, when there is no draft, and so going to war doesn't require sending your children or the children of congressmen to war, congresswomen to war, that it's somehow we need to make it not so appealing for our presidents because it seems like it's going to be awfully tempting for Trump.
I was just going to add that the whole dogma of the Cold War was mutually assured destruction, MAD, which I love that acronym. And it was like, we can't be so crazy that we're going to actually use these weapons and destroy one another. And so we went from a high of about 70 to 80,000 nuclear weapons at the height of the Cold War between Russia and the United States down to where we are now, somewhere in the 15,000 nuclear missile range. Still way too many, still enough to destroy the world how many times over, but we are definitely moving in the wrong direction.
Under President Trump, because he's a man baby who wants some big weapons.
Those are your words.
Let's get some questions from our audience. Who has a question out here?
Hi. First off, Doug, I just want to say I love Edge of Tomorrow so much. I can't wait for the follow-up. Just throwing that out the way.
Thank you.
When it comes to making a director's cut, especially one that has come out 8 years after its initial release, do you do reshoots, or just is it you in the editing bay restructuring the film?
I wouldn't be above doing reshoots if I thought they were needed. But in this case, I knew I had the footage, and the thing that happened is we were making the movie while the events were going on. In fact, I shot in Baghdad while the war was going on, much to the horror, and actually I'd been banned by the studio from going to Iraq for obvious reasons because there was a war going on. And
how did you go? What crew did you take with you?
A very small
some small, crazy crew, and then I hired locals in Iraq, and including a amazing Iraqi filmmaker who, when we launched the bombs and blew up Baghdad, and people were looting office buildings for furniture and typewriters and computers, he went in and installed 30,000 feet of 35 millimeter negative and a camera, and then he went and shot a movie. Like not a documentary, he went in, it's like a flower growing in the desert. And so he was a key component to the filming there, was Odeh Rashid, who now has political asylum and lives here in New York. And so I can talk about him. But everybody else is still over there. And so I'm somebody who kind of acts first and then gets permission later. Or
hopefully.
Right, because if you ask permission first, they might say no. And then it's really hard to go do that.
I think when it comes to going to an actual war zone, they will say no.
And in fact, they did say no, and I was like, I'm going to do it anyhow. And I said, Born Identity, when I say it's Paris, it's really Paris. The studio wanted me to shoot in Montreal. I said, no, people are paying money to go see the movies. If I say it's Paris, it should be Paris. We're saying this is Baghdad. We should show Baghdad, especially because it's about a war in Baghdad. It's a really significant player. And I don't think I had really... So I sort of gone for sort of artistic, superficial reasons. I wanted to show what it really looked like. There's a river that goes right through the middle of Baghdad. When you shoot in Morocco, they don't have that river, which is where other movies set in Baghdad tend to shoot. So I went for sort of kind of superficial artistic reasons, but the war was still going on, and I got to see people that reminded me of New Yorkers, but New York after it's been attacked. And it had a really more significant impact on me as a human being than I really gave it credence for. It's not PTSD, but it's sort of like, it's overwhelming emotional information. And it really took me a few years to process the experience I'd had there. And that's part of going back into the cut. I originally wanted to go back because I knew I had better performances from Sean Penn and Naomi Watts. But when I started getting back into the cut, I realized this movie is also about the run-up to a war and processing that. I finally had enough time after having been in Baghdad to really be able to do a proper job editing it.
You said that it had a massive effect on you as a human being, as I imagine it would. Do you have any idea what kind of effect it had on you as an American?
I mean, I just felt so bad for these people. I mean, these are just families who are being put into, these, I met one of the crew members I worked with there, who was in college at the time. When we were invading, his brother went and got a gun and said, "I'm going to go shoot Americans." And this person on my crew, who was his brother, and these are just people in college.
Yeah.
But suddenly another country has attacked their country, and they're like, "We should go defend our country." And this person on my crew convinced his brother not to go do that. But that people were being put in this kind of situation to even ponder that really was,
Painful.
because and thinking about the servicemen, I have a very good friend who served in Iraq, and he was guarding an outpost. This is an American serviceman, and a truck is coming streaming towards the outpost, and they fired a warning shot in the air, and the truck is still coming, and he gave the order to shoot the driver of the truck. And it turns out it was an innocent man. And this is a friend of mine here from New York who still is dealing with this today, and that when we go to war, we put American men and women, servicemen and servicewomen, in these situations to make these impossible choices that they're going to have to be processing forever. So that decision to go to war should not be made lightly.
Next question. We have time for two more, I think, right here.
Hi, question for both Doug and Valerie. When you look at the current political environment where anybody is fair game, and you mentioned earlier that the president's using a safety net as a pardon, presidential pardon as a safety net to people, what measures do you think intelligence agencies can implement to protect their operatives from administrations who have evil kind of...
Well, I hope what happened to me is a one-off, never happens again. How bizarre that one's own government would out their own covert operative, particularly that I was working on something presumably that was important to them, WMD, nuclear weapons, and so forth. It was clearly political, partisan retribution. As to what can be put into place to prevent that, one thing you could do, and nothing is ever fail-safe on this, but to depoliticize the intelligence community. What I know best is the CIA here. I know that after the Iraq War, hundreds of years of operational experience walked out the door in my form because they were really so discouraged by how the war had been so politicized. It was clear, I think, in retrospect, that the intelligence was fit around the policy rather than the intelligence driving the policy.
Are you seeing anything like that happen right now, or do you know of anything happening like that right now, where people are walking out the door?
Look, well, I will say that the vast majority of people working in the CIA, working for their really modest government salaries, they are going to work every single day trying to make the world a better place, keeping it safe for democracy. They're professional. They would rather chew off their right arm than be accused of somehow shading some intelligence that. But it still happens. It happens with every president under every administration because they get into power and then all of a sudden they look around and go, whew, I've got the whole CIA at my disposal and here's something I really want to do. There's some great scenes in the film where the character playing Scooter Libby is at CIA headquarters talking to some analysts, and by the end of the scene, your head is just churning because he's so clever at basically confusing the whole question and driving it toward the point that he's already made, which is we should go to war in Iraq.
I think it's time for one more question. Who has the microphone right here?
Hi.
Hi.
So I was wondering, going through the experience of making the film while the events were so recently happening and then being compelled to remake a cut, what are your thoughts on movies being made about recent events occurring? Do you think there should be a gap between events occurring and telling that story?
No, I don't think there should be a gap. That's a very good question, by the way. I feel like, I did this recut, and it's like, I'm thinking, can you just do that? Can a director just go, hey, I'm recutting my movie? And I thought, the world's changed, technology's changed. Like, it used to be when you made a movie, it was actually a photographic process, and it was like, the thing was physically cut, and once it's in the theaters, like, it's an object that really, it's like it can't be changed. But today, it's all digital. Like, there's no reason the version that, Fair Game goes on Netflix November 1. There is no reason that on November 7th I couldn't be like, I'm just going to make a few more changes. Like, is there
a living
yeah, I mean, maybe
document.
should the act of what a movie is changed to reflect technology today, and therefore, yeah, I think you could make a movie today about recent events, and then 6 months from now, recent events might change, or you might change as a filmmaker, and you evolve the movie. I think that, so I do think that if anything, because the way we watch films has changed, because it's streaming and it's digital and it can evolve, why not do films that are about current events and let them be living, breathing objects?
One of the big criticisms that was levied after during the run-up to the Iraq War and after was how poor of a job the gatekeepers in media essentially did in sort of holding truth to power. Because they were so close to the power themselves, and we were so soon after 9/11 that they felt the need that they had to sort of represent a certain kind of patriotism that was sweeping across the country. Indeed. Rightfully so in a lot of ways. And I think they did you wrong in a number of ways as well as Joe Wilson. But when it comes to right now, we're seeing social media essentially wipe out the gatekeepers completely. And we're seeing misinformation and disinformation come from all separate different countries, political parties. And it's getting to the point where people are saying that eventually technology will allow people on their home computer to essentially re-edit footage to put different faces in different places.
And they do that.
And they do that already. Not just photos, but video footage. You could have a politician saying something that they
I'm
didn't
more
say.
optimistic about this, that maybe there's a democratization happening here. When you look at Citizens United, where suddenly the Koch brothers have this outsized influence because they can spend all this money on political advertising, but I'm about to go do a political ad this afternoon with Chris Rock, and we're doing it for free. And there's people all across America going and creating things for free and putting them online. And if they're good, you don't need to buy airtime.
Well, that's the flip side. But what makes you optimistic? Because there is such distortion. And
I'm an optimist.
I know. Well, and that's
I'm not trying to be a pessimist.
No,
I'm
I just am
asking,
an optimist. I don't think you'd go in the film business if you weren't an optimist.
What a former CIA person working in the
CIA... She dealt with nuclear weapons, so she probably comes from a more pessimistic
more
place.
realistic view of the world.
Or realistic
Doug.
and,
right, it is double-edged, right? We're all supposed, Mark Zuckerberg was saying we're all supposed to be way more connected with Facebook, and we have been. You can see people's babies and their vacations and whatnot, but the flip side of that is the incredible amount of manipulation that can also happen the way things stand now, and all the news sites that were shared on your feed, and so it's becoming more difficult than ever before, more challenging to suss out what is real. Where are you getting your information? How do you trust it? And of course, we all love our own little echo chambers, don't we? We all love to hear our opinions, echoed back to us. So it's really hard to find out what is really going on.
Now you're making me a little more depressed.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, Doug. I'm sorry. I love the film. Congratulations on its when it originally came out and being great and being even better now with the director's cut. And Valerie, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us and talk to us about your experience and what you went through.
Our pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Of course, the film is available now on iTunes, right? People can download it, and it'll be Netflix November 1st.
November 1, yeah.
Excellent. Everybody give Doug and Valerie a big round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.